we are going to talk about vegetative or asexual reproduction in plants. Sometimes it's called vegetative propagation. If you hear that term, it's the same thing. Asexual reproduction in plants can occur in a few different ways. We're going to explore each one of these. We're going to look at rhizomes, runners, tubers or bulbs, and fragmentation. Asexual reproduction in plants results in plants that have identical genes of the parent plant. Note that this is very different from sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction, you get variety in the offspring. They can have different genetic traits. It's sort of a combining and mixing of those traits. But with asexual reproduction, the offspring are exactly like the parents. So in essence, you're getting clones of the parents. So let's look at a few of the ways that plants can reproduce asexually. One of those ways is rhizomes. Rhizomes are a very common method of asexual reproduction. What happens is that the plant will send down a root under the ground, and every once in a while the root will shoot up a new plant. The roots grow horizontally under the ground, and they'll just kind of shoot up. This can be funny sometimes if you're trying to get rid of one of these plants, you might pull one out of the ground, not realizing that all the other plants nearby are connected to this plant. Here are some examples of rhizomes. Iris grow this way, as well as crabgrass and water lilies. Related to rhizomes are runners, or sometimes called stolons. But instead of growing horizontally underground, the runners grow horizontally along the top of the soil, and every once in a while they will shoot roots down into the ground. And then from there, the plants will grow and they'll make new plants that way. Strawberries are one example of this. Some other examples include duckweed and mint, which you can see there as they're growing. They're all connected to that one sort of root system. And ferns grow this way as well. Tubers and bulbs are another method of asexual reproduction. Tubers and bulbs are interesting. Tubers, potatoes are examples of tubers. Tubers and bulbs are modified parts of a plant. So they can grow from stems, they can grow from roots, and pretty much they're an energy storage for this plant. Think carrots, and onions and things like that. They are all modified parts of plants. So eyes, roots, and buds grow out of them, and they can develop into a new plant. If you've ever seen the eyes on a potato, if you've let a potato sit too long on your counter, you can actually see these new roots starting to grow out of the potato, and that is the potato reproducing asexually. So some examples, I mentioned potatoes. There's also onions and fennel, tulips, and daffodils are also some flowers that grow using bulbs. Fragmentation is another example of asexual reproduction in plants. This is when a piece of a plant grows roots and lives independently of the mother plant. So you can break a piece of this plant off from the mother plant and replant that plant in its own soil, and it will regrow. This is very commonly used in nurseries that are growing plants to sell. Geraniums is an example, as well as the Christmas cactus, and we have a lab that we can do in class that can show this process of fragmentation, and you'll actually get a chance to grow your own plant this way. So some other examples are the jade plant, which is a succulent. Succulents are cacti plants. They store water very well. Kalanchoe is another one. You can see the little buds kind of growing up there. And Eurasian milfoil, which is an invasive species, and it's actually kind of funny story with Eurasian milfoil. In order to get rid of this species, they used to take the plant and they used to cut it up. Well, if you fragment a plant that can reproduce asexually, they actually ended up making more Eurasian milfoil rather than getting rid of it with that method. So we use asexual reproduction to our advantage. farmers, gardeners, companies, they'll reproduce plants asexually to repeat the traits. If a plant has a positive trait, or it's producing a lot of fruit, or it's really hardy and it's growing well, they'll try to reproduce that plant so that they can have more of them. So they'll use asexual reproduction to do that. Another method that they often use is grafting. Grafting is when they take a piece of one plant and they actually put it into another plant, and they can combine it onto that plant, and it can start growing out of that other plant. So it says grafting of fragile plants onto hardy roots is used to create many different types of apples and other fruits. Here's an example of that. This tree right here is actually growing 4 different types of apples that were grafted into this one plant. So you have a plant with strong roots, take advantage of that, and grow a lot of different apples from one plant. So let's talk about some of the advantages of asexual reproduction. Why would a plant or any other organism want to reproduce this way? For one thing, the offspring are genetically identical, so if there are good traits, those traits can be preserved and can be passed along to their offspring, and hopefully that means survival for the species as a whole. Only the parent plant is necessary, so there's no need for pollination. So if you're lacking pollinators or wind or any other type of thing, you don't need that to reproduce. You can do it all on your own. It's faster also. It's much faster. You don't have to wait for seeds to develop. The plants don't have to wait to be pollinated. It can happen quickly. Some more advantages include that it's useful to reproduce many plants quickly for nursery or agricultural use, so it's an advantage to us as humans. There's less biological energy involved in this process. So if you think about all the nutrients that a plant might need to undergo reproduction, it actually doesn't need as much nutrients or as much energy. It doesn't have to use as many of its resources to reproduce asexually. And environments that are stable and experience little change are safe for asexual reproduction. So what that means is that if you are able to survive well as a plant in a particular environment, and that environment is not changing, then asexual reproduction is completely to your advantage, because all your offspring will also be able to survive in that same environment. Because remember, the offspring from asexual reproduction are clones, right? They're identical to the mother plant. So while there are many advantages of asexual reproduction, there are also disadvantages. Plants gradually lose their ability to resist environmental change. So once that environmental changes, they may not be so well suited to the new environment, and they might not survive. As opposed to in sexual reproduction, when there's genetic variability, when those different traits combine and can make new traits, then it could be likely that some of the offspring would be able to survive a changing environment, that some of them would be well suited to that environment. But with asexual reproduction, if the parent isn't well suited, the offspring are not going to be well suited and they'll die out. Plants can also lose their ability to resist disease. If one plant is not immune to a particular bacteria or a virus that comes in and infects them, then all the other plants have the exact same genetics, and they're not going to be immune to that as well. And you can lose entire forests, entire fields through diseases that come in and wipe out because their genetics are all the same and they're not resistant. Overcrowding can also be a major issue. If you think about asexual reproduction, it's fast, it's quick, it's easy, and every single plant can just keep on reproducing without the need for another pollinator. So space can quickly become crowded. And when space becomes overcrowded, then there aren't as much nutrients or sunlight or water available to support all of the individuals in that area. So overcrowding can be a major problem. So as you can see, asexual reproduction does have its advantages, but it also has its disadvantages. And a lot of that depends on the environment. And there really is no right or wrong way for these plants. It just depends on their environment and their genetics and how well suited they are to live in the area where they're at.